dark blue wire with red. I'm gonna bring up our lab scope so we can test our communication wire. I got my lab scope set up right there. I have my lab scope test lead connected to the lab scope. We are grounding our lab scope over here. So the lab scope is set up on the voltage scale. Now I'm gonna connect my lab scope test lead to the communication wire of the glow plug module. So I'm gonna lift up the camera so you can see. So the key is on in the vehicle. If we have communication on this wire, we're gonna see a square wave type pattern on the lab scope screen. So watch this. You see that? So as soon as I connect this test lead to my back probing tool, look at the screen over there. So just like that. So we have good communication at the glow plug control module. Okay. So we have good communication over here. So the glow plug module is getting good power, good ground. Communication is there on the network, but this module is not turning on the glow plugs. So this module is bad. So we're good. Now we know this is bad. The turbo actuator is working. Now we're gonna test the swirl motor. The swirl motor has 3 wires over here. I'm gonna back probe these 3 wires and then I'll bring you guys back up. I'm gonna back probe those wires off camera and then I'll bring you guys back up. Here's what I did off camera. I back probed the 3 wires at the swirl motor. As you can see, our back probing tools are back probing all the wires at the swirl motor electrical connector. So that's good. As you can see, we have some type of control on the lab scope screen. So all the wires at the swirl motor come from the engine computer. The fact that we have this control over here, this tells me that the wiring of the swirl motor is good. So I'm gonna turn on the other channels. Okay, let's see what voltages we have on these channels. So we have 0.50 volts on the yellow trace, and then 12.18 volts on the green trace, and minus 0.04 volts on the blue trace. So based on the voltages, the blue trace is the ground, the green trace is the power supply, and then the yellow trace is our control from the engine computer. Okay, so that's good. This tells me that the wiring of the swirl motor is good. So now we're gonna use our RTL scan tool to turn on the swirl motor. So we're gonna tell the engine computer, which is over here below this battery. This is the engine computer right here. So the scan tool is gonna tell the engine computer to turn on the swirl motor, which is below the turbo. As that command leaves the engine computer and goes to the swirl motor, this pulse width modulated control that you see over here is going to get wider and smaller as we increase the percentage of the control. Okay, so let's go to swirl actuator. So now we're going to tell the scan tool to tell the engine computer to turn on the swirl motor. Now I want you guys to watch this control over here on the lab scope screen. So we're gonna go to 0%, no change. Let's go to 20%. You see how this is getting big. Let's go to 40%. It's gonna get bigger. 60%, gets even bigger. 80%, way bigger. 100%. This is like full on. Now as I'm turning this on, we should hear a click coming from the swirl motor over here. Oops. Okay, as I'm turning this on, if the swirl motor was good, we should hear a click. Now, you might say, what about if the flaps inside the intake manifolds are stuck? Because if the flaps in the intake manifolds are stuck, it's going to prevent the swirl motor from working. If the flaps in the intake manifolds were stuck, we would hear a clicking or a grinding noise coming from the motor. The fact that it's silent, this tells me that the swirl motor or swirl actuator is bad. So the control is there. As you can see, when we turn this on, our control moves. So this is 100%. If we go down to 0, watch how it's going to get small. 20%. Oops, we got a fly here. 20%. Look at that. 40%. Okay. So the control is there. Okay. The wiring is also good, but let me just put this over here. Okay, so our control is there. Let's go to 100%. So 100%, but there's no noise coming from the swirl motor. The swirl motor, this motor over here, is not working. Okay, so that's good. We know the glow plug control module is bad, the swirl motor is bad, the wiring is good, the control from the computer is getting to the swirl motor, but the swirl motor is not working. It's not making any noise. Okay, so we're done with this test. We're gonna back out. Actually, let's see, active test. The other thing we're gonna check is going to be the EGR. Remember, we had the EGR code. So exhaust gas recirculation positioner. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get to the EGR valve, which is over here. I'm gonna get to the wires of the EGR valve. I'm gonna back probe all the wires at the EGR valve, and then I'll bring you guys back up. We're gonna use our scanner to turn the EGR valve on and off, and then we're gonna watch the voltage on the EGR position sensor signal wire to see if it's gonna change. Okay, so we have a bad glow plug module, bad swirl motor. Now let's check the EGR valve. I'm gonna get the wires at the EGR valve electrical connector back probed, and then I'll bring you guys back up. Now we're gonna test the EGR valve. I disconnected the EGR valve electrical connector off camera. The EGR valve electrical connector has 3 wires, and I'm back probing all the wires at the EGR valve electrical connector. Here's what we have on the lab scope screen. So the blue trace has 12 volts, 12.16 volts. The green trace has 0 volts. So it looks like the green trace is the ground, and then the yellow trace has 3.28 volts. So the yellow trace is the control. The key is on inside the vehicle. Okay, so the fact that we have these voltages at these wires at the EGR electrical connector, this tells me that the wiring of the EGR valve is good. So all these wires come from the engine computer. So we have 12 volts on this wire over here. This blue trace has 12 volts. The yellow trace has 3 volts. As you can see, we have some type of pulse width modulated control here on this yellow trace. And then the green trace has ground. So the wiring is good. So now I'm gonna reconnect. I'm gonna reconnect the electrical connector of the EGR valve to the EGR. Let me see if I can do this one-handed while we still have these wires back probed. I don't know if I can do this one-handed. Okay, so right there. So the electrical connector is reconnected. Now our control has changed. So we're gonna reconnect it all the way. Okay, so this is what we have. Remember, this was low. After we reconnected it, we went up to about 10.28 volts on the yellow trace. So now we're gonna bring up our RTEL, the RTEL tool. We're gonna use the RTEL tool to turn on the EGR valve. So I'm sorry for the glare. So the wiring over here is good. So we're gonna put our RTEL right here. So watch this. We're gonna go to exhaust gas recirculation positioner. We're gonna turn this on. Let's see if this control over here is gonna change. Watch this. You see this? The fact that this control is changing, this tells me that the command coming from the engine computer is making it to the valve. So The scan tool is telling the engine computer to open the EGR valve, and our command is there at the valve, but we don't hear anything. So this EGR valve is bad. Actually, I heard a click. I don't know if you heard it. Oh, it's clicking. I don't like the way this valve is clicking, so it could be sticking. Okay, so the EGR valve wiring is good. Okay, so the way this valve is making noise, it sounds like it could be sticking. We might have to remove it so we can look at the plunger on the valve as we're commanding it on and off to see if it's actually moving smoothly. Okay, and sometimes these EGR valves just require cleaning. We can remove it. Maybe there's a lot of carbon built up around it. We can remove it and clean it. But right now we're just going to focus on the diagnosis. So we know the wiring is good. We might have to remove the valve to look at it and see if it's clogged. If there's a lot of carbon built up around it, we might have to clean it. Okay, so that's good. I mean, I feel comfortable with this. Let's back out. When we back out, you're gonna see this command is gonna change. Okay, so that's good. Let's see what codes we have. Okay, so we have our particulate filter code. Now this lean bus code came up because we were doing some tests at the glow plug control unit. So that's good. We are done over here. So now I'm gonna get all these tools out of the way. Let's get our RTL scan tool out of the way. Now I can disconnect these bag probing tools so we can get our lab scope out of the way as well. So we are done with the test that we had to do under the hood. We got our testing tools removed. Now I'm gonna disconnect the mass airflow sensor. Let's get this air filter box out of the way. I would like to remove this silencer. I'm gonna remove this bolt over here. I want to look inside this tube. I believe there will be oil in that tube. So this turbo needs to be replaced. The turbo is leaking. Because if you look over here, if you look right here, you shouldn't have a lot of oil right here. Okay? And the fact that all this area is covered with oil, that tells me that the turbo is leaking. Okay, I'm gonna remove this. I'm gonna remove this silencer. Actually, the silencer has a third bolt that goes back here, but this one doesn't have it. So we're gonna get this out of the way. Look at this. Oh wow. See all this oil in this tube? Look how much oil we have over here. And then if you look in here, look at how much oil we have inside the turbo. You see this pool of oil that we have over here, motor oil coming out of the turbo outlet. I'm gonna use this little sharp rag. I'm gonna put it in here. We're gonna wipe this down. Look. You see? The sharp rag is wet. So this turbo is leaking oil very badly. Okay? So the turbo has to be replaced. So this van is gonna need a couple things. It's gonna need a turbo, it's gonna need a swirl motor, it's gonna need a glow plug control unit, possibly an EGR valve. We're gonna remove the valve first and see if there's a lot of carbon around it. If there isn't a lot of carbon built up around the EGR valve, we're gonna replace the EGR valve as well. I'm gonna put this stuff back on off camera. I'm gonna put the silencer back on and the air filter box back, and then we're going to call the customer so we can tell the customer what we found. Now we have one last test to do. Let's go under the vehicle so we can test the DPF pressure differential sensor. We are here under the vehicle. Here is the DPF and the pressure differential sensor is up there. So here is our pressure differential sensor. I'm gonna remove this bracket. So now we're gonna test the pressure differential sensor. I'm gonna disconnect this tube. This tube comes from the front of the DPF. So the big tube is the tube that goes in front of the DPF, and then the small tube goes to the back of the DPF. So I already undid this clamp off camera. So now I'm going to push the clamp up, and then I'm going to try to bend this down a little bit, just like that. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use a pressure pump. We're gonna connect the pressure pump to this hose that goes to the pressure differential sensor. We're gonna pressurize this hose. We're gonna send pressure down this hose, and then we're gonna look at the data feed on the scan tool. If the pressure differential sensor is working, when we pressurize this hose, our pressure on the pressure differential sensor data graph should move up smoothly without any dropouts. I'm going to use this line. Before I connect our pressure pump to the pressure differential sensor hose, let me show it to you. So here is the pressure pump that we're gonna use. So I'm gonna connect the line to this hose. Okay, so that hose is connected to this pressure pump. Let's pressurize this hose. Okay, let's release it. Okay, so now I'm gonna have you guys focused on the data feed over here on the scan tool. So I'm gonna increase the pressure again. I'm gonna increase the pressure. So right there, as you can see, we went all the way up to 13 psi, and then I'm gonna release it. Our pressure drops. The fact that the pressure is increasing smoothly, we don't have any dropouts or glitches, that tells me that the DPF pressure differential sensor is good. Okay, so watch that. I'm gonna increase it again, and then I'm gonna release it. So that's good, guys. Okay, our pressure differential sensor is good. So we don't have a pressure differential sensor issue. Okay, as you can see, our pressure is increasing. When I let off the pressure, it drops right away. Okay, so that's good, guys. We are done with our diagnosis. This DPF is clogged. I'm gonna recommend cleaning this with a diesel particulate filter cleaner to see if it's gonna help. If it doesn't help, we're gonna have to replace this DPF. So we are done with our diagnosis. Let's get out of under the van so we can wrap up this video. We are done with our diagnosis. We know what this van needs so that it can have its power back. This van is gonna need a turbo. So the turbo on this van is not building boost pressure. It's leaking oil, so the turbo is bad. We gotta replace the turbo. And then The swirl motor is defective. The wiring of the swirl motor is good, but the swirl motor is not working. When we remove the swirl motor, we're going to check the flaps inside the intake manifold by actuating the linkages that connect the intake manifold flaps to the swirl motor. If they are stuck, we might have to replace the intake manifolds also. And then the glow plug module also has to be replaced. The EGR valve is probably going to have to be replaced. We're going to remove it first to see if there's a lot of carbon built up around it. If there's a lot of carbon around it, we might have to install an OEM EGR valve on this. And then the last thing would be the DPF. I'm going to recommend cleaning the DPF first with the DPF cleaner. After we clean it, if the soot level doesn't come down, we're going to have to replace the DPF. So this is going to need a bunch of stuff. I am going to call the customer and let him know. And then he's going to decide. I don't know if I mentioned that the owner of this vehicle is a fellow mechanic. He works on cars too, and he uses this van for mobile work. So I don't know if he's going to let us fix it. Maybe he's going to fix it himself. We're going to give him the results of the test that we did. If he gives us the job, I'm going to bring you guys back up after I replace all those components so I can show you how this vehicle is going to run better. Now, the ABS light was also on the dash, and the brake light and the ESP light. The ABS light being on the dash, it means there's a problem in the ABS system. So that's something else, and that's a different system. If the customer wants us to attack that also, we're going to have to do a different diagnosis fee and a different diagnosis process to diagnose the ABS system and the ESP system. We just focused around the engine bay and the engine computer. I'm going to talk to the customer. If the customer wants us to also figure out why the ABS light is on, we're going to have to do maybe a separate video and a separate diagnosis for that. Okay, so I'm going to leave this right over here. I'll talk to the customer. I don't know what he's going to decide. If he decides to give us the go ahead to fix this, I will bring you guys back up after I fix all these components so I can show you how this van is going to drive. If we don't get the job, this will be what you see. This will be maybe the last time you will see this van, because the customer had to drive a couple of hours to get to us. So this is not going to be a van that we're going to be seeing every day. Hopefully we're going to get the job, but if not, we're going to move on to the next car. And I would like to appreciate my friend Elvin Ramos for bringing his van to us. I hope you liked the video. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like the video, give it a thumb down. But if you do, you gotta tell me why so we can make better videos in the future. If this is your first time here, subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell so you can get notified every time I upload a new video. If you have any comments, questions, criticism, leave them in the comment box. Thanks for watching. See you next time.